to be introducing today's speaker, Dr. Claire Gaudiani, on a topic that lies at the very core of both organizations, generosity. Thank you to the local Rotary clubs, Bridgewater, Harrisonburg, Rockingham,
sorry to be a burden,
as well as James Madison University, especially Vice President of the University Advancement Nick Landridge, for once again partnering with the Community Foundation to organize this special event. And a very special thank you to Mrs. Judy Strickler for establishing the Rocco Forum on Philanthropy. Through its work bringing us nationally renowned speakers such as Dr. Gaudiani, the forum is giving our local community a wonderful gift. I am so proud and grateful to be part of this community that places such a high value and emphasis on philanthropic excellence. Which leads me to the thought that there are some who may question this event as preaching to the choir. Each of you in the audience are most likely already participating in civic, religious, and other nonprofit organizations, and donating to charitable institutions in one form or another. What more is there to know about generosity? Well, I, for one, think you are wise to invest your time here today, and your presence is much appreciated. We can each do more. We can each do better. And our speaker is more than well equipped to handle the task of inspiring us all to do exactly that. Dr. Claire Gaudiani's career has been shaped by the belief that action is every bit as important as reflection. She launched her first nonprofit organization, or as she prefers to call them, social profit organizations, while a graduate student at Indiana University, where she earned her master's and PhD in French literature. She later went on to serve for 13 years as president of her undergraduate alma mater, Connecticut College. Under her leadership, the college's endowment quintupled, and there were large increases in enrollment, culminating with a ranking in the nation's top 25 liberal arts colleges. After retiring from Connecticut College, she became a senior research scholar at Yale University School of Law, focusing on her interest in the history and economics of American philanthropy. She is currently adjunct professor of philanthropy at New York University's Wagner School of Public Service. During her career, she has been awarded 10 honorary doctorates and has served on more than 30 nonprofit boards, as well as numerous corporate boards. Her insights have appeared in the New York Times, the Financial Times, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, USA Today, and MSNBC. She has literally written the book on citizen generosity. No less than 4 of them, in fact, plus numerous articles. Her best-known books include The Greater Good, How Philanthropy Drives the American Economy and Can Save Capitalism, published in 2003, and Daughters of the Declaration, How Women Social Entrepreneurs Built the American Dream, published just last year. No less amazing than this list of laudable accomplishments are Claire's achievements in her personal life as a wife and mother. She is a devoted daughter and sister, has been married to husband David Burnett, also a PhD for 44 years, raised 2 accomplished children, and is now enjoying the role of a lifetime as grandmother to Alex, Francesca, Consuelo, and Olivia. As a number of you may know, my day job is practicing law. In studying Claire's background and her books, it struck me that in law we each have a duty of care, but in life we each have a duty to care. As I'm sure Claire can state much more eloquently than I, voluntary caring, or generosity, is intrinsic to our individual and collective success. Generosity is not just a feel-good proposition. It has tangible benefits for each of us. As the aphorism goes, a rising tide floats all boats. Claire is here to help us choir members understand not only why generosity is our duty, but how to go about it even more effectively. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Claire Gaudiani to the podium.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jennifer. How outstandingly generous. I'm sorry, I know my mother called you to help you with that introduction. She does that all the time. She's 89, and she finds out where I'm going to speak, and then she insists on writing the introduction. So I apologize. My mother is a very forceful. When you're a mother of 6 upstanding citizens who mostly stand up, it's very hard to fend her off. So thank you, Jennifer. You're very sweet. It is such a privilege for me to be here with all of you in this extraordinary community in a state where the nation's greatest ideals were formulated. This air, this valley, the place that all of you have probably from time to time taken for granted. This is where America was born. You know that. All of you who are Rotarians, you defined through Rotary, which I know as a Paul Harris Fellow in the New London, Connecticut chapter, you define what it is to be America, not only all over America, but all over the world. Who would be so crazy as to say, let's annihilate polio from the whole world? Only Americans. Who else? And then they would do what's been done throughout our country since 1776. You have an idea that Michael Porter at the Harvard Business School would call a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. That's what entrepreneurs have. They have a BHAG, and then they set strategies and tactics to bring that goal into reality. And then they set about raising capital, which is called fundraising if you're in my life and in the life of many of you. So as Rotarians, you are part of an extraordinary dream that manifested itself all over the world. And fellow Rotarians all over the world understand that you have brought them this common set of commitments as human beings. All the statements about human dignity in the UN resolutions emerge from our documents. This is who we are. And of course, as I'll speak about in a minute, the community foundation here that Judy and Stephanie and Revlon and so many of you, Jennifer as chair, have been working on is a secret missile from you into the future to make sure that America's values and commitments go on when you're not here anymore. When you're in God's embrace, this work will go on because you have left funds here that our government, and I do believe your wise representative who just spoke, they will continue to protect the liberty and the freedom of donor intent to make these funds you set up the secret guided missiles into the future to assure that American values of this community of Harrisonburg go forward. So you have important institutions that come to you right from our founding fathers, and I hope that you'll see them and treasure them, just as occasionally you really look at this beautiful valley and say, I see it today again for the first time. I'm not taking its beauty and importance for granted. Now let me tell you that Americans are not generous because we're rich, which is what Europeans think. Of course you're generous, you're rich. No. We are rich as a country because of our generosity. And our generosity wasn't just a mistake. It was built into our culture by the founding fathers. As you know, when they wrote those extraordinary documents, and particularly the Declaration, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, conceived most significantly by your great founder of this university, or great namesake of this university, that Bill of Rights which tells you how important you are as an individual. Yes, you're part of a great country, but you are important as an individual. If you don't do what America needs, you should assume it won't get done. Don't assume someone else will do it or the government will do it, or no. Each of us has to carry that responsibility, as each of the signers did, as James Madison did, when he insisted on a Bill of Rights that defined the work of each individual and the rights of each individual. Take all of that seriously. When you go to bed at night and say your prayers and you say thank you, ask God to continue to make the call to citizenship clear in your life and make it clear to each other. It's too easy to take it all for granted, just like the beauty of these hills. American generosity is at the core of who we are as a people. The founders knew that they had to prepare a country that would quickly be able to build wealth. And in fact, the patent laws were built into the Constitution. But so also, they understood that the democracy they envisioned would be dependent on a spirit of mutuality, of what Tocqueville called self-interest, rightly understood. That is, I understand that it is in my best interest to assure that you flourish with your children, because in your flourishing, I will have a context for flourishing. And if you care about my flourishing as I care about yours, and both of us care about everyone else's flourishing as powerfully as we care about our own, do you see what kind of a fabric that creates? Our founders thought that through. They had read Aristotle, who said there is no democracy without virtue in the people. What? There had never been a country conceived in documents that expressed a creed. Countries had been formed by force, not by a creed, by a set of very well-educated men who brought that education to bear as they sought to create an ideal environment for human flourishing, an ideal environment for the continued flourishing of the two great commandments. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. That sounds spiritual, and of course it is. But look at how practical it is when you talk about that mutual flourishing. You see how practical they were in that profound spirituality. That is our legacy. That is where we are meant to continue to be powerful in a world that is fast changing around us. And it's obviously true that our economy will not remain the largest economy. If you have an economy based on 1 billion people, it's going to become bigger than an economy based on 300 million people, even if it takes 50 years. But does that mean that America will no longer be a global leader? Laugh on. Our global leadership emerges from your community and communities like this one across the land. Our global hegemony emerges from our creed and the way we believe it. See how they treat one another. See how they love one another. See how they make each other flourish. That was the call of our founders. So yes, they wanted to encourage wealth building. They knew they were going to have to probably face another war with England soon that was going to put its navy back in shape and reassault the new nation. So wealth building had to be freely possible, and we have to make sure that continues. But they also called for mutuality, for a spirit of generosity. How was that going to work? And the founders themselves worried about that. They worried that wealth building would induce some to become avaricious, greedy, competition, to kill everybody else and knock out all the competition and be the primary force. And the founders said, in 3 generations, there'll be wealth, but there'll be no mutuality. And what they called for was the practice of a set of republican virtues. That's what they called them. The virtues that would sustain the republic. And they started with, yes, self-reliance and independence, but compassion and generosity and this feeling and practice of mutual flourishing. And in that balance, where virtue tempered wealth building and assured the long life of mutuality and democracy, they could be sure, with that balance, that there could be wealth building and there would be continued commitment to those great words in the Declaration: all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where had that been said before, where people were setting up a country to make it happen? And of course, one of the first things that happened after this schema had been set up by the founders was that people began to practice generosity. Philanthropy started in 1778. I'd love to tell you the story, but I can't. It's a great story. The very first acts of philanthropy happened before the ink was dry on the Declaration and before the words had been written into the Constitution. That's how old your commitment to generosity, to philanthropy is. And what did philanthropy do to America? Well, let me just tell you, we are the only nation in the world where the generosity of individual citizens has enabled the growth of our economy. And I hope some of you will have a chance to read The Greater Good. The first 6 chapters lay this out, but let me just tell you a couple of points. American philanthropy, largely through foundations, creates human capital, physical capital, and intellectual capital. What do I mean? The growth of human capital is the most important asset in any economy. In fact, Mr. Becker got the Nobel Prize for doing the basic work proving that fact in economics in 1974, Gary Becker. And he said that 75% of a nation's wealth is embedded in its human capital, its people. And if you look across the world, you see which countries are poor. They are the ones who don't invest in their people. You realize that in your country, education for all was the law before the Civil War? Radical. It isn't the case still in a significant number of countries around the world. So human capital, but you've done it right here. What about recently? Judy told me last night when the budget of the university made it look like a lot of students couldn't come back for second semester because their parents had both lost their jobs. And what happened? Did you all say, gee, tough luck for those families? No, you didn't. You got together and you made James Madison for keeps, right? And you put money together so that those young people could come back and finish their education. That was an investment in human capital. Those young people will go forward in this nation to become our future doctors and lawyers, our Rotarians, our foundation and nonprofit professionals, and our corporate and business leaders, so that jobs and healthy communities are a part of our future. You made that happen. That's been happening in our country since before the signing of the Declaration. First scholarships were given in 1636, so that the sons of farmers and candlestick makers, the able sons, could attend a small college in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and not go back to England for an education. The investment in human capital throughout our nation has made a dramatic difference in the assets available for development all across our country. It's one of our greatest assets, the scholarships we give, not just to kids in school, but to people returning, to kids in preschool who don't have a good condition at home. Investments in human capital. It's one of the reasons people want to have their children raised here, and they take great risks and come from all over the world. You can't blame them. Nobody else has this kind of a setup. And so, human capital, physical capital. Imagine this university without the gifts of buildings given by donors. Imagine Harrisonburg without the gift buildings. Imagine New York or Chicago, places you've gone to, Washington, D.C. What if you just imagined that all of the gift buildings donated by generous people were suddenly sucked out, and the museums, the theaters, the hospitals, the medical clinics and institutes, the research institutes, the universities and colleges throughout the land? Americans make investments in physical capital. And that's the gift that keeps on giving. The first museums that were put up in the city of Chicago are still operating. They've been operating for more than 100 years. And the 9 of those museums create more dollar flow each year to that city than all of the sports teams in the city of Chicago put together. Stunning. All gifted all through the years. Americans invest in people and places that are assets for the time to come. We are future-thinking people. We are long-term investors. And finally, intellectual capital. Now I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to raise your hand if you've ever taken an antibiotic. Come on, face it. Boy, Judy, you didn't tell me this was a community of sickos. Well, of course. But do you know that penicillin was developed by a donor? A young doctor in England discovered that in the morning when he came back to his lab, some of the glass sheets over his petri dishes of Staphylococcus had blown aside and exposed the staph to the air. And where there was air exposure, the Staphylococcus was dead. And he said, I wonder what could have killed this most dangerous of microbes. And I wonder if I could isolate it, whatever killed the staph, maybe it could be made into a medicine. Well, of course, he went to his government. And his government said, that's a crazy idea. Whatever killed the Staphylococcus would kill a person. dumb idea. No money for you. Then he went to investors, and they said, you know, we've got to get a decent rate of return for our investors. This is a crazy idea. Chances are it won't work. And he was going to wash the dishes and just forget about it. And somebody said to him, go to America. There are these nutballs who will give you money for a crazy idea because they're high-risk thinkers. Well, of course, he showed up, and people directed him to Mr. Rockefeller, who had a foundation, which I'll mention again. And Mr. Rockefeller thought things through just like an American. He said, what's the deal here? I could give you $1 million for 2 years to try to isolate this stuff, whatever it is, and see what happens. And chances are it's going to be no use. So I'll lose $1 million. But what's the other side of the bargain? This is how Americans think. The other side of the bargain is, if it could turn out to something useful, we would have an assault on infectious disease, which he knew was the main reason people died. Soldiers don't die of the immediate wound, they die of the infection. Mothers don't die in childbirth for most reasons except infection, postpuerperal infections. Little kids, older people, they get an infection, it goes throughout their bodies, and they die. Aha. So here I've got $1 million to lose and everything to gain. That's a bargain I'll take, right? And he did. And within 2 years, the young doc had isolated penicillin. It was a mold that had been present in the air and fallen down and killed the staff. And you and I, many of us, are not only here because we've taken penicillin, but a bunch of us whose daddies, like mine, flew a P-51 over Japan during the Second World War and was wounded and very, very sick and tortured when he got back, was given penicillin. He lived. So I'm here, and my 5 brothers and sisters are here because of penicillin. And I'll bet many of you had dads or granddads who lived through that war because no infantry group left without their own penicillin so that they could be immediately attended to. Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller. Thank you, philanthropy in America. Thank you, long-term investment in the future of mutual flourishing. This didn't happen by mistake. This happened by calculated thinking about how to invest money in each other. What if he had kept the $1 million? Well, penicillin eventually would have been found, but it might have been another 30 or 40 years. Big difference in the history. Big difference for us today. His $1 million? Nobody cares. And that's how you're thinking about the money you're investing here for the future. That you'd rather have it making a difference in the lives of those young people who finish school, or in the beauty of buildings that serve the community and the young people and their faculty here. You'd rather have the money making a difference than just making interest. That's how American philanthropy creates assets for the future, investing in human capital, physical capital, and intellectual capital. And there are hundreds of stories of intellectual capital investment. And I can't tell them to you today, but it's a great set of stories, stuff you wouldn't believe. And it causes me to tell you that you are all recipients of American philanthropy. If you raised your hand, you received the benefit of philanthropy even if you never got a scholarship. If you gave an antibiotic to a child, your family is a recipient of philanthropy. And I sat on a panel with Mr. Gates Sr., Bill Gates Sr., and he said on that panel, I interviewed him, it was very funny, and he said, my family and I have received more assets from American philanthropy as a family than we have yet been able to give back. Think about that. That's a man who understands what it is to be a grateful American, and he wants to keep on giving, and he wants his son to do that, because he realizes that all that we have here as Americans is our blessing, and we got it from others, so our responsibility is to move that asset forward. Now, let me tell you that in the very few minutes I've got, that this kind of work goes on in your community foundation in a most powerful way. There are 700 community foundations across the land, and they are making this ongoing flourishing happen where America is, in communities, caring for their own, and the others who arrive here, as you have welcomed so many from other parts of the world. This is America. Support your community foundation. Understand that it's your little piece of sharing with Gates and Rockefeller. It's your opportunity to send a missile of goodness into the future, just as Mr. Rockefeller sent a missile of goodness into your life as you looked at a very sick child and watched that child take one of the antibiotics that was developed as a consequence of penicillin. So we can be a force for the future. We can be the people who have the awesome power of the founders. Let me conclude by reminding you again that the founders themselves were all volunteers. They were volunteers. They did what they did and brought what they brought together and argued and made compromises and struggled as volunteers. And so our work must increase our volunteerism. I know you're all busy, and you're all more busy than ever, and you're busy on iPads and iPhones, but I would say to you, one of the most important things you could hear this morning is the importance of volunteering with your families. David and I brought our young teen children to a soup kitchen in inner city Philadelphia, where they saw some of the most desperately poor people who showed up for food to be served by these kids, our kids who were in private school. When you talk to our children about what made a difference in their lives, they'll mention the people they met around those tables. Don't make it volunteer work as something you do over here and they do over there. That's great, sure. But give yourselves a chance, even if it's just once a month, to commit to a service activity that you do with your children so they can witness you putting the flourishing of others in front of other things you'd like to be doing, of other things that you could be doing with them. Because you're telling them, we're Americans. This is what we do. And you'll make choices like this with your family someday. Volunteerism is a critical part of who we are and how we are as Americans. And it will continue to define American exceptionalism and America's global leadership in the most profound way for the centuries to come. But only if you and I make it happen in the time God gives us on earth. And that we embed this in our children and our grandchildren. This is the country we received. Other generations, like the greatest generation that some of us are related to, made supreme sacrifices. We're being asked to make daily sacrifices to the greatness of this country, to our gratitude for the work of our forebears. And we're being asked to do it in the generous use of time and the generous use of money and the generous commitment to the flourishing of this land, community by community. So I'd close by reminding you that we have made a commitment as a nation that we all benefit from in those words, all men are created equal. But I want to remind you that we're not just generous as we are because we're rich. We got to be as rich as we are as a nation because of our generosity, because generations of people who were here then and others who came and imitated immediately the generosity that they saw here. That's how they came to feel like Americans, because they copied that. And many of them, and perhaps some of you, don't understand the degree to which we are sealed in this commitment by the grace of God. The last words of the Declaration of Independence are the words that seal us in this commitment, this covenant of generosity, of philanthropy, of volunteerism. And those words say, in order to form this union, with the help of divine providence, we pledge each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Stay up here for a minute.
Do we have
the microphone?
time for questions?
I think the microphone.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can do questions. Thank you. You are not applauding me. You are applauding this country, where we came from, and I hope you're seeing where you need to move yourself. I'm understanding from my fearless leader that it's possible to have one or two questions or reactions.
Is anybody?
I know Rotary meetings.
They're watching.
I know. I promise we'll end on time.
All right. You want to stay with me for a minute and we'll close?
I think that's an offer I should.
Question, yeah.
Okay, there we are.
Claire, you were doing some work and some thinking around the bottom 10, the bottom 15% of people living in poverty.
Yes.
And then it goes with that.
Yes.
Where is your work on that? Where has that taken you? And are you planning to publish something specific to that topic?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, after all I've told you, I'm sorry, the question is, the questioner knows that I've been working after the Generosity Unbound book. The last 3 chapters talk about an awesome idea called the Declaration Initiative. And the questioner is asking where that project is. And I would tell you that I believe that this country has to surprise the socks off the rest of the world and say that by 2026, July 4th, 2026, which is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration that in this country we should have assured that all Americans have access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And right now, we should be saying 85% of all men are created equal and endowed by their, but we don't say that. We say all men. The truth is, the bottom 15% of the American population hasn't got a prayer to have access. I'm not talking about handouts. I'm not talking about income equalization. I'm talking about opportunity to reach. If you're a fourth-generation foster child, you have an 80% chance of being incarcerated before the age of 34. Now that means that we're watching those little kids walk a plank. It might not surprise you that I'm not comfortable with that, given what I believe. And I think that we just haven't asked ourselves, have we done enough? We all feel like poverty, that's one of, we did the war on poverty, we're all kind of sick of it. But I think we have to take a renewed spirit and say that there are young people out there, and I'm now doing this project. I have a tiny little staff. I've not started a 501c3. I've got a little tiny staff of people who are attached to a 501c3, and we're creating models of how people in the lowest income areas, family of 4 living on $11,000 a year, how they can be helped to analyze the problems in their society as market opportunities. Not enough transportation, elderly people can't get to the doctor because no taxis will come to our neighborhood. That's a market opportunity. How about if we enable some of the young people to start a taxi service? And we'll lend the money in and wait at 1% interest for a return. We'll help them start businesses so they learn how to become productive, independent people on a permanent basis. I believe that too much nonprofit work that goes on is palliative. It's like hospice. The hospice nurse comes to take care of you, and she doesn't expect that after her care you're going to rise up and be healthy again. No. You believe, and she believes, that she's going to care for you until the Lord takes you home. And that's kind of like a certain amount of nonprofit. We don't transform people's lives, we just tend them where they are. And I'm thinking in the next 15 years, what could we do as a nation, community by community? Not with so much government help. Let's just press the government back a little bit and say, let us have a little space to do it ourselves, like colonial families took care of each other, like 19th century families took care of each other, like many communities. Perhaps this one does a better job of taking care of each other, so the government doesn't have to, but there still will be flourishing. See, I believe we could do this. We just haven't called each other to it. Imagine what would happen if our 15-year-olds would watch us for the next 15 years, decide that we were going to make those kinds of productive, independent, permanent changes in the lives of the poor actually happen, community by community. Do you know what we'd show the rest of the world? That creed that I talked about and quoted to you is alive and well. It's not something that we say half-heartedly. It's something we live with and act on. And those young people would start the middle of their careers at age 30 with a nation with more human capital that was productive and less that was a continuous cost. Because it's not a matter of we'll leave them where they are and it won't matter. It matters. It costs us a fortune. When you spend $30,000 on a man in prison, I always want to say, give me the guy and the $30,000 for 3 or 4 years, I could take him around the world. I could show him how to be a different person. He could have coursework. He could have supervised opportunities to get my drift? Instead, we're dropping that money down to the sewer. It's doing nothing. I think we're smarter than that. And I think we're at a moment now where we need a new dream. And it is that by 2026, the 250th, we're going to thank the founders by giving them the present that they aspired to and left us as an assignment. It wasn't perfect when they wrote that stuff, but they had faith in us, you and me, not somebody else. You personally. They had that faith. And I think we should say that by 250 years, my dear founding fathers, here's the present to justify your faith in us. By this July 4th, 2026, all men will have access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we can do this. And if you're interested, email me, because I'm getting people from all over the country to get interested in how to do it. So God bless you. Thank you for your wonderful attention. And God bless this community and each of you as you take up the work of the founding fathers. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Stay right here.
Yes.
Would you mind standing with me for a minute while I finish?
Thank you again.
Thank you, Claire. I just wanted to say, I just wanted to say thank you for being here, and you make me so proud to be a part of the Community Foundation that was able to bring you here to this large group. Thanks to the Rocco Forum and Judy Strickler and our little subcommittee of Revlon Hill, Crystal Deal, who you know, and Stephanie Bird have worked hard to put this all together.
Great,
and
thanks
to all the Rotarians for allowing us to be here. Just a little quick housekeeping. As you're leaving, the Community Foundation has an annual report that was just published that we would like for you to have a copy of. Take one, take two, give some to your friends. We would love to hear from you. Also, you can leave your card, so perhaps we can communicate about philanthropy to Claire, or give us a little card with your name, address, and some kind of contact information, and we'll be glad to put everybody together as they might see fit. One last thing, Claire, you're promised to stay here for a book signing.
Yep.
And we'll have that set up in just a few minutes, so if anybody wants to stay for that, we'd really give you a chance to talk more to Claire. That would be your opportunity.
Great.
So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Great thanks. Thank you, Judy. Thanks, Stephanie.
Really good together.
Great. Whoops. I didn't take it. I promise.
I don't have the gavel. I can think of only one thing. Sorry about that. And the Rotarians, our motto is
Thank you.
service above self.
Thanks so much.
1.2 million Rotarians around the world make a tremendous difference.
Thanks so much.
We can provide more with more people, with more human capital, our own human capital.
Thank you.
In the Harrisonburg Mass
Thanks so
Club,
much.
in the Rockingham Club, Bridgewater Club, Harrisonburg Club, and all the clubs in our district.
Is that okay?
I am proud to be a Rotarian, and the reason I am a Rotarian is for the very thing of this service above self. Claire, thank you for the wonderful inspiration. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Mal.